Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Halloween edition of The Gathering. I'm David Ault, and it's a pleasure to have you here. If you look behind me on that entry table there, you'll see a container filled with Halloween treats and candies. We moved into a new neighborhood at the start of this year, and rumor mill tells us that there's a lot of trick or treat activity, so we're kind of excited about that. I've been thinking a lot about my own childhood memories of Halloween and realizing how much I love this time of year. And it was in those reflections that I thought about something just crazy. I grew up in a coastal town in Texas called Beaumont. So, very much near the water, the Gulf of Mexico. And so it's quite humid there. Humidity breeds a lot of mosquitoes. And if I have my memory accurate, I was told that just prior to my birth, there was a large outbreak of encephalitis. And so that scary kind of dis-ease comes from insects, from mosquitoes. And so it was not uncommon at the time for these big chemical trucks to ride up and down the streets of our neighborhoods spraying DDT, which is a mosquito repellent, very toxic chemical. I was thinking that my neighborhood activity was unique because lots of children in the neighborhood, lots of bicycles, and so we would ride into the spray of the DDT truck. The moment that we heard the engines, and I remember there was a very definitive sound and the jets of the spray, we would all run and get on our bikes, and sort of like the scene in E.T. where all of the children are riding, we would be in that formation riding into the spray. And we had a sort of competition to see who could stay the longest. But when you think about it, it's who can stay the longest in the poison. Crazy stuff. And I thought we were unique with that until I decided to Google it this week. And you should do that because it will show you a lot of video links on YouTube of children all across the country who did that. And I'm like, well, like minds, right? We all found something playful in this activity. And so there must have been a lot of trucks spraying DDT in the 60s and into the 70s and to help combat mosquitoes. They don't do that anymore, at least not that I'm aware of. And but reflecting upon that metaphorically and physically, I'm like, wow, I'm surprised that I didn't grow some type of third eye or extra limb or something. And yet, I'm also fascinated at the way in which we make choices. So, physically, the body, both the physical body and our physical geography, I want you to notice how readily inclined we are to change our relationship with anything poisonous. So, for example, if there are things in our diet that are deemed poisonous or detrimental to our health, the body can only take so much exposure to that before it says enough and it begins to break down. And in the breaking down, we tend to make changes. Sometimes people are more preventative with that and they create a lifestyle where they make choices that are far from the poison. And yet, a lot of times, what we see is that so much illness and so much aggravation and challenge within the physical comes from these relationships with poison. And so we're pretty much inclined to do it. A doctor will say you're going to need to cut back. And we don't put too much of a fight up because we need our bodies. And we realize that the functionality of the body determines the quality of living. Same with geography. If we're in an area, let's say, where there's a lot of toxins or mold, chances are we will shift our relationship with that geography. I'm not saying that we don't have some pushback or resistance, but not a lot, because it affects us so greatly. But I became fascinated in my reflection this week with all things poison. It's Halloween. With how mental poison doesn't cause the same a sense of allowing for change. You know what I mean by that? Mental poison? Anything that contains this ingredient of separatism. I think the greatest illusion that we combat or have to navigate through is the idea of separatism. What do I mean by that? It is the ultimate illusion to me, the idea of an us and them. Anything that promotes separatism promotes suffering. So, for example, if I have a negative thought reaction simply about myself, whether it is not being good enough, not being lovable, not being worthy, identifying myself with shame, that is a form of separatism, because what I'm doing is I'm deliberately and purposefully moving myself away from a truth, the truth, that says that I am a vessel, I am an example, I am an instrument of something that is holy and infallible, which we might call God. I am that. Again, one of the best examples is Rumi, the 12th century Sufi poet, saying, "You're not a drop in the ocean. You're not this thing just taking up space and causing a problem. You are the ocean in a drop." Biblically, the idea of I and the Father are one. All of those things teach us, remind us, pull us home to a reawakening of our sacredness, that we matter, that who and what we are is not an accident, but something very deliberate. We are on an incarnated journey. We are a soul navigating through a human curriculum. So anything separate wants to tell us otherwise. Anything separate is the great lie. It is the great illusion. So when I hold myself in thought poison, in personal contempt, when I degrade myself, I am like being a child riding my bike into the spray of poison, except I never exit. I never stop. You know, when I was a kid, the way that we won was the person who could stay in the suffering and the stinging and the eyes and the itchy skin the longest. There's no prize to that, but you know, you're kids and you're playing a game, and so who's going to win? Who can withstand the suffering the most? With mental poison, it's kind of like the foolishness of that childish thinking. We continue to ride into the spray of poison, except we never exit. So separatism is a poison. It is in the framework of the psyche. It is in the framework of all of our mental, relational, habitual, daily thinking. And so if we never change that, if we never make any type of effort like we would for our physical body, then it's like we are perpetually riding into that spray. And obviously then the choice of that creates a corresponding effect. I find that in both teaching and studying, being the teacher and the student of metaphysical principles, that there's only so much that any of us can do if we're just listening and experiencing and participating through the realm of the intellect. If I'm reading about this, if you're listening to me speak about this, we can nod affirmatively, but it doesn't mean that we change the relationship to the poison. And if there was something that was particularly more easily in more easily manifested in terms of the negative effects, we might. But things that are thought crimes or thought poison that we inject upon ourselves, we become accustomed to. We become accustomed to a world that feels negative, and we get trapped. We get hooked into the illusion that that's just the way that it is, rather than understanding that the world is a mirror. And if a poisonous world is what we are constantly referring, seeing, and participating in, it isn't the world being neutral. It is that the outpicturing of our interior, the poison of our interior, is why we see it that way. And so what becomes enough? Just like what becomes enough within the physical body to promote change, what becomes enough within us mentally to want to shift our relationship to that poison? What I am finding that is helpful is not bare knuckling these things. It's not using willpower. So I was teaching this past week and the subject of willpower came up. And I want to offer this to you, that willpower is something that is manufactured from our humanness. It is, when you look at it from a physics standpoint, willpower can only be sustained at the level of our intense meeting of that thing. So for example, if I'm using willpower to manage weight, then my management of my weight will only be met by the continuing willpower that I am giving to the practice. So willpower can only be sustained at the level that of the energy that I am putting into it. And there are times when the cycle of that energy just can't be sustained. We have to rest. There is a principle of rhythm. There is an inhale and an exhale. There is a flow and an ebb. And so it's impossible to manage something at the same intensity 24/7. So willpower is not sustainable. And yet we teach about the glories of willpower. We talk about how you gotta hustle, and the whole atmosphere of hustle has to do with the manufacturing of a false idea of willpower is the only way. What's the polarity of that? The polarity of that is will. The will of God, if you're familiar with that term, or the will of creation. The misnomer around the phrase the will of God is been taught in a way that is intertwined with some idea of sacrifice. You know, we actually use it as an escapism. Well, if it's the will of God, as if the will of that which is creation itself is different from our own. Remember, you are the ocean in a drop. So the will of creation, or the will of God, is our will. There is no separatism to that. So the will is to simply to move and breathe and have our being in this thing called love, this energy called life. It's nothing more. It's not saying, I know that you want to be an artist, but the will of God is that you go and you be a ditch digger. Nothing against ditch diggers, but you can see the misinterpretation of something sacrificial in the idea of the will of God, and nothing could be more bastardized in terms of an interpretation. It's just not true. The will of God then is not willpower, and it's not hustle. It's alignment. So if you imagine that the vibrational field of the will of God is like this, and we're sort of waffling over here or waffling over here. To be in alignment with the will of God means to stop efforting and to just return to center. To let down the poison of separatism and to realign ourselves with the truth of the will of God, which is all is life, all is love. There is no place where this idea of God does not exist. The only reality is God. So to To realign with the will of God is simply to reawaken from the struggle, to exit the spray of the poison, if you will. That's the will of God. Willpower is, I'm going to do it on my own. I need to effort. I need to make something happen. That in and of itself is a whole nother brand of poison. So the will of God, the returning, offers us the ability to shift our thoughts, our poisonous thoughts, and to transmute them or create a sort of alchemy, if you will. That alchemy is, I love the idea, is taking something from poison to potion, to an elixir of life. And that means that we stop looking at anything wrong as wrong. And we create the alchemy in our mind. And so instead of looking at ourselves with mental poison as I have to stop doing this, I have to stop doing this, we turn to the thing that we are doing. We turn to the poison and say, where is this from? What is it that you want me to know? Do you see the difference here? It's looking at all things as if the poison now becomes not something detrimental, but it becomes a potion of inquiry. It becomes, as Socrates would say, the unexamined life isn't worth living. And so now I'm going to examine the poison and go, why am I so habitually ingesting this? What is it telling me? And all of those things bring us back to the fundamental lie, which is I am separate. That's where the work comes in. That's where the true exit begins to take place, because I can then begin to understand, honor, and see that all along I have never been separate. All along there has never been a need to self-punish, because what I am is an instrument of God. So to take the poison and to create alchemical shifts into a potion is to simply turn to rather than run away. Turn to rather than run away. I've been saying this in so many different ways this year. It's beginning to look at the biggest perpetrators of our grief as something otherworldly, rather than just seeing them through the lens of this plane of existence. This person harmed me. What if you stepped back? What if you stepped back from the poison and you looked at the poison as a potion that says, there's more going on than meets the eye. This person then showed up in order to help facilitate your exit from the poison. This person showed up, this circumstance happened, not at you, to you, in order to break you, but it happened in order to get you to reawaken to your innate power. You see, when we're just looking and having a relationship with the poison, we're giving our power to the poison. When you shift from poison to potion, the potion gives the power back. We're ingesting something that is holistically in alignment with the will of God. So how do we do that? We begin to take our thoughts, those poisonous thoughts, and we go, okay, I'm being taught that I need to affirm that I am whole, complete, and perfect. That's fine. But if I'm affirming I'm whole, complete, and perfect from a frenzied place of fear, all that I'm really doing is stirring the poison, because I haven't dealt with the fear. I'm doing the affirmation from a disjointed intention. I need to step back a little bit. I don't need to ride more furiously into a poison of fixing things and the poison of the illusion that says I'm not enough. I need to exit for a moment, and I need to let that poison. I don't make the poison. I let the poison amalgamate into an alchemical shift of a potion that says, hey, You're not separate. It's the merging back to the origin of our soul. Then I can affirm that I am whole, complete, and perfect. Then I can begin to make these strides into looking and blessing everything that I see. Because if I tell you as a spiritual teacher that you need to bless everyone, you need to forgive everyone, but we haven't really dealt with the ultimate poison of I am separate mentally, then you'll use your willpower to try to do those steps and those things, and ultimately then the physics of the energy of keeping at that will begin to dissolve and fade. But what we're looking at is a complete and total surrender of the lie. And the only way that I have found that is most effective to combat the lie is through compassion. Compassion impels me to turn to the lie and to see it for what it is, to love the lie. I know that sounds crazy. To love the perpetrator, to love the humiliation, to love the abuse, not make it right, but love it from a place of wise understanding that sees that somehow, some way, there has been a meticulousness, a grace that has navigated me through all of that poison to get to a place of understanding and to be here now in this moment. Until I can see it, until I can do that, until I can turn and face the dragons of my past, then I will always be at the mercy of the dragon. I will, just like a child, continue to be riding into this harming spray, wishing that it would stop, but continuing on my own self-imposed willpower to live in the land of hope rather than in the land and the physicality of a embodied action. Compassion. Compassion for the entirety of your path. Compassion for how many miles we've all ridden in the poison. Okay, so we've spent X number of years doing that. Time doesn't matter. There is no such thing as wasted time. What matters is the decision point of now. And so let's take our poisons and allow them to become potions. Let's turn to all of the things that we have disowned about ourselves and look at them with compassion and understanding and even nurturing and praise and say thank you. Thank you for the lesson. Thank you for the opportunity that each of those things provided for me to make better, more wise decisions. Thank you for playing a part in getting me to where I am today, because where I am right now is enough. That takes the trick and allows it to become a treat. Happy Halloween, everybody. Much love. Thank you.